Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to Searching for Dragons. I'm Snappy, and I'm joined, as always, by my good friend and co-host, Graham. How's it going, Graham?
Great, thanks. How are you?
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm really excited about this one. It's great to be with you. We're here to talk about incredible artists from across history who pursue magic through their creation. And today we're here for part two of our deep dive into Unica Zürn, and we're going to be specifically looking at her book, The House of Illnesses. So, Grant, talk to us a bit, remind us who Unica is, and tell us about this book when it comes out and set us up for this deep dive.
Right. So Unica Zürn was a German surrealist. She was born in 1916 and dies 1970 tragically by suicide. And she's most well known for anagram poetry, automatic drawing, and surrealist prose. And she strikes out on her own in 1930 at the age of 14. A few years later, she starts working at the German film agency, animating commercials, as well as writing like fiction for magazines, like mystery sort of stories. And then it's in 1953 is when her life really has a drastic shift. She meets Hans Bellmer, who was one of these surrealists while he was in Berlin. And he brings her to Paris and introduces her to the surrealist circle, and she becomes accepted into the group. And from there is really when that's sort of the second phase of her writing, which is these anagram poems and these automatic drawings, which are sort of like automatic drawings are sort of like drawings without a preconceived concept.
Right. Where she's
So
just trusting in immediate inspiration and in seeing where she's guided, trying to not
operating,
think. Go ahead.
operating from the subconscious.
Yeah, in those kind of flow states. Well, you know what I think it is too is like you have to recognize though there's also an extraordinary level of training that happens. Like when you see people who commit to automatic drawing, to put it in context, it's the same thing when you see like a great musician. You know, you'll watch those musicians and they'll be playing like if a pianist will be playing in one time signature with their left hand and not even thinking about it, and then playing another one with their right hand. And you're able to do that through that practice and through that ability to transform that skill into some conscious, and then you can really play. And she's doing that
Exactly.
from a drawing perspective, the same kind of thing, right?
Exactly. Well said. Well said. And in 1957, she meets a writer and artist named Henri Michaud. And this is really where her life takes a intense shift because she's convinced that he is what she calls the man of Jasmine or the white-haired man, which is actually a figure from her childhood dreams. And she's convinced that he has actually stepped out of her dreams into real life.
Beautiful. Wow.
And he invites her to participate in experiments with mescaline, and also provides her with a lot of art materials. He puts on he organizes her first exhibition of drawings in Paris. And in 1960, she has the first of several nervous breakdowns. She's institutionalized and diagnosed with schizophrenia, and she suffers from it until her death in 1970.
Such an intense
Um,
life. So did Henri Michaud know, or like did he recognize the full extent of her obsession with him?
it's hard to say. As they'll say in the introduction here, we only really know their interactions based on what she writes about him in The Man of Jasmine and a little bit in The House of Illnesses. So it's really hard to say. But yeah,
Probably
really
not.
hard to say.
Probably
Probably
not.
not. He may have understood on the surface, but maybe not
Right.
realized the depths
The
of it. But
depths.
we don't really have his own account of their interactions. But while she was institutionalized, he would bring her the notebooks and art materials required to continue writing and drawing. So he was sort of like, like a kind patronage sort of thing.
A friend.
Um,
He stayed.
a
He stayed a
friend.
close companion throughout her life, which is beautiful. So
Hmm.
love hearing that.
So this is the cover for the, I believe, 2019 edition of The House of Illnesses, which I have here. It was published by Atlas Press. And this is an important edition because she specifies that this was actually a manuscript that she writes in 1958 and is not published until after her death.
Oh wow.
And she specifies in the manuscript that it must not be published without her drawings. And publishers did not listen to this and published the text independently of the drawings for several editions until, well, I have the dates here. 1986 is the first German edition that has the drawings. And then this is, I think, the first English edition that has the drawings.
Wow.
So
I'm
this
glad
is
we get to
as
experience this.
and it's slightly amended too to include some other notes that she had made. And so this is the closest to the original that we can get in English.
It's closest to her original intent.
Yeah, and it actually has a facsimile of her manuscript throughout the book as well. I include a couple pages of it just to show the actual handwriting, it's very
Sure.
interesting.
Oh wow. I love that. All right.
So let's dive into the introduction here. We'll probably repeat a couple things, but that's okay. So if one considers her work with anagram poems to be the second phase in her writing career after the initial period that began in Berlin, Zürn's return to writing prose in France in the late 1950s marked a distinct new third phase that culminated in her most acclaimed works, The Man of Jasmine and Dark Spring. Her writing became increasingly autobiographical, as is evident in The House of Illnesses from 1958, which is the first text from this new phase. As with most of the texts that were to follow, The House of Illnesses resonated with an event which occurred in 1957, and that was to have a radical effect on her life, her meeting with the writer and artist Henri Michaud. Zürn was immediately convinced he was a living incarnation of a childhood fantasy figure. As she later recalls, the white man, Henri Michaud, is the exact image of her childhood vision of the Man of Jasmine. He would appear in both of these guises as the White Man and the Jasmine Man throughout much of her subsequent output, and seems to have become linked in Zürn's mind with Herman Melville, a childhood hero to whom the present story is dedicated due to the fact that they share the same initials.
That's so
And
interesting.
yeah, and these letters increasingly assume a greater significance for her, and even the Hotel Minerve in Paris came to be drawn into the grammatomancy. That's where she lived briefly with Hans Belmer.
Okay, so she was a Herman Melville stan. That's so fun.
Mhm.
So Melville famously wrote Moby Dick. Wow, beautiful.
Yeah, and you'll even see on the cover it says H.M. Herman Melville, which is very interesting. So, while the exact nature of her emotional and artistic involvement with Michaud can only be guessed at from her writing, his entry into her life renewed her zeal for creating anagram poems, not a few being based on lines from his poems, and automatic drawings. Less positively, he may have invited her to join him in his experiments with mescaline and inadvertently furthered her latent mental instability. Yet he would also play the role of a solicitous friend that she described in her writings. And when she was later hospitalized in Paris, he frequently visited her and brought her the notebook she needed for her work, and was also responsible for organizing one of her most important Paris exhibitions while she was still in the hospital. So, although Zürn wrote of her first meeting in The Man of Jasmine, the shock of this encounter is so great that she is unable to recover from it. She continued, from this day on, she begins very, very slowly to lose her reason. It would take 3 years before she finally succumbed to the hallucinations that she gradually began to experience, and to suffer the first of the mental breakdowns that are documented in harrowing detail in the same book. But the white man, or more precisely, a white-haired man, had already made his entrance in the House of Illnesses as a benign friend and helper.
Oh, interesting. So he appears to her kind of like an elderly father figure. you know,
Hmm.
white-haired man. That's such a profound image that we see all over the place. The grandfather,
Yeah, definitely.
interesting.
So Zern's return to prose writing after a gap of nearly 4 years was brought on by a fever, as described in The Man of Jasmine. Quote, she attends a large protest meeting against the atom bomb and contracts jaundice. Feverish and lying in bed, she produces the manuscript at the House of Illnesses. And I should note that she wrote this manuscript in 10 days,
Also, I just gotta say, what a badass
right?
protesting the atomic bomb. Gotta love that. Um, oh man, though, jaundice, that's wild. So she must have been very unhealthy.
Yeah,
And,
she was
you know,
hospitalized for it. And it was in the hospital that she produces the manuscript. I think from April 30th to May 10th or 11th is when she writes the manuscript.
wild. In a
So she
fever.
was,
Sorry, continue.
yeah, no, that's okay. She was then living in Aumenonville, a small town 50 miles from Paris, where she and Hans Belmer stayed for 2 years. It reminded her of Grunwald, the district in Berlin where she grew up. She says Hermanoville and Grunewald are places where you can let your mind run free. The mood of the text is correspondingly light. I would maybe disagree with that. Her mind, her mind is loosed into a gently satirical fantasy about falling ill and recovering in a strange hospital whose rooms consisted of human organs.
Oh yeah, that just sounds such like a beloved child fantasy. Falling ill and waking up in a hospital made of organs. All right.
Right? That's why I was like, I don't know about that.
Maybe comparatively to her earlier stuff, and maybe her Germanic prose is very
Yeah.
light. I
Yeah, I
mean,
mean the Man of Jasmine is and Dark Spring are very intense. So is the Trumpets of Jericho. So I can see it.
right, right. We have to remember we are talking Unica Zürn here. So in
Yeah,
comparison,
it's all dark. It's just varying shades of darkness.
exactly.
Some of the rooms are repellent, particularly those housing the distinctly feminine organs, such as the bosom parlor and the hall of the bellies, foreshadowing the discomfort Zern would write of in regard to womanhood and his physical condition, while others are calming and reassuring. The narrator, who has had the hearts of her eyes shot out, feels compelled to stay in the institution because of its irrational head doctor, Dr. Mortimer, who she describes as her personal death, from mort in French meaning death, and immer in German, always, or because of her own fears of having to return to the coldness of the outside world. And I would argue that, this she very much saw the world as cold and almost like some people say she almost idolized her sick periods because she wrote the most during those periods. I wouldn't really agree with that. She was more prolific during those times, but I don't think she encouraged these states to be brought on, as some people say.
Maybe you know what
It's
it could
hard to
be
say.
related. It could be related. It could be related to her relationship with Michaud because it seems like her connection to Michaud is one of art, right? And
Hmm.
so I can see that desire for connection with him producing this desire to be in those erratic states to create more art, maybe. But again, we're speculating here.
Exactly. It's all speculation. So she later in the book, she later discovers that her eye hearts are gradually growing back and her strength returns. She is able to resolve the inner conflict that has governed her stay in this place. But more tellingly, a conflict between two familiars, an eagle and a red scorpion, who alternately lay claim to her. The work has a happy ending, yet it is hard to avoid the feeling that the author is extending a prophetic feeler into the future, that in her mind she is already pacing the corridors she will come to know all too well in 2.5 years' time, when she will be hospitalized in a psychiatric ward. For the moment, though, this small, exquisite artist book maintains a stabilizing humor, like that which she shared with Belmer, and ultimately concludes on a hopeful note. The House of
Interesting.
Illnesses was not published during her lifetime. It first appeared in translation but without illustrations as La Maison de Maladie in 1971. The first German edition, likewise without the illustrations, and as part of the volume De Manim Jasmin, was published by Ullstein in Berlin in 1977. The first facsimile edition, with both the illustrations and the handwritten pages, was published by Brinkmann and Bose and Lilith in Berlin in 1986. This publication also included one of two typewritten drafts that she had evidently prepared for his publication, and this present translation is based on this. While only marginally different from the handwritten text, it clarifies a number of passages and seems closer to her wishes. She explicitly says in the manuscript she did not want it published without the drawings.
Right.
So it's important that this is like a fulfillment of her wishes.
Yeah, it seems like from reading that the 86 version is the most completed, and this is adapted from that. So this
Yeah,
would make this the most accurate English rendition, but that 86 edition is the most correct because it's based on her final draft notes. It includes her drawings. And
and
it's
it's
kind of wild that it took, almost, what is it, 15 years after her death until they finally published it according to her specifications. But I'm glad it did eventually see that proper edition. And it's amazing that we get to experience it now in English.
absolutely. So here we have the intro drawing, Das Haus der Krankheiten, or the House of Illnesses. And this is, we'll see a few of the drawings I included throughout the presentation, but I wanted to start with this one. Just very bizarre, out there, and surreal.
I want people to pay attention, though. If you look, you can see that part of the part of the style of her automatic writing is that she has these continuous line strokes that connect every single one of the doodle, and then the doodles themselves merge into a larger grotesque form. And that's something you're going to see throughout these drawings, and it's really intriguing.
So I saw someone describe her drawings as chimerical, and I would definitely agree with
That's
that.
a really good way to put it. Chimerical. Beautiful.
And we'll see in the bottom this little structure. I believe this is the actual House of Illnesses with the watchtower that we'll read about at the top.
Oh, I see. Yeah, just vaguely in the bottom corner there, in that sort of
Yeah, in the faded draw pencil ink pencil, I believe.
right. Wild. Okay,
So on the next page we have some. This is I just wanted to show what her actual manuscript looked like. This is all. So the book has the original manuscript on one side and then the translation on the other.
oh, that's so fun. So this would be the
Yeah.
original German manuscript in Unica's hand.
So if you can read German, you could, with this edition, read it in her original language.
Beautiful. I love that.
So let's start.
Awesome.
Section 1 is we're going to read most of the book here, so bear with us, folks.
Oh, this is fun. This is what they're here for.
It's a ride. It's a ride. It's a ride. So an ace shot. Look me in the eyes, said Dr. Mortimer. But my eyes slipped off to one side, to the left, and then began to freeze up. As if drawn along by strings, my gaze ran off into the distance, the left-hand distance, over the small tree on the horizon, and slightly further above the tree, to come to a halt in the white sky. You should try to look into my eyes, said Dr. Mortimer, and it was only with difficulty that I managed to reel in my faraway, distant gaze. How long it took before I was back looking into Dr. Mortimer's eyes, but then my eyes closed from tiredness. Dr. Mortimer lifted first one of my eyelids, then the other. He looked into my eyes. An ace shot, he said sadly, but with admiration. Both of the two hearts in your eyes have been shot right through the center. An ace shot, indeed. That this had happened was a matter of indifference to me. Everything was now a matter of indifference, just as long as I was allowed to look to the left, yes, over there to the left, as far as the furthest tree, right into the white evening sky. Over there, my open eyes lay down to sleep. I hadn't even realized that eyes had hearts. Mine didn't seem to need any, given the stubborn way they managed to find their way to the light over there, in the far distance on the left, over to the furthest tree. Over there, my eyes lay down to sleep. He obviously must have had two guns, said Dr. Mortimer. He couldn't do that with just one, unless he took two shots. In that case, he could have used a single weapon, but no, he must have had two guns. He must have stood there, a gun in each hand, aimed at both eyes at once, and squeezed the triggers simultaneously. That's quite a feat. I did not hear what Dr. Mortimer was saying. I didn't even ask whether the injury was serious. I didn't feel any pain, so long as no one disturbed my new line of vision. That was my main concern. Only my new line of vision mattered to me. I would defend it to the hilt, however tired I felt. You're not even listening, said Dr. Mortimer. I was just telling you that we could operate, but it wouldn't be without its dangers. But everything's fine, I said. I'm not in pain. It seems that eyes can live even without hearts. But we must at least remove the dead hearts, or else they'll start to rot. Now look me in the eyes. He was quite unbearable with his eternal look me in the eyes. If only he knew what an effort it was for me to withdraw my eyes from over there on the left, from far, far away. I made another attempt, but just as I had almost managed to look at him, my eyes closed again in exhaustion. Dr. Mortimer lifted my eyelids and looked into my eyes. But that's quite impossible, he said, shocked. Heart-shaped entry holes, heart-shaped exit holes, nothing more nor less. An ace shot. He didn't shoot the hearts of your eyes through the center. No, his shots have blasted the hearts clean away. Dr. Mortimer let go of my eyelids, and I sat there with eyes closed, hoping he would stop being so astonished. But he was too worked up. I spent the whole day sitting in the watchtower, looking out for enemies. And then don't even.
This is so wild. So we're getting all of this incredible, that shooting her eyes out, shooting the hearts out of her eyes, blinding her to all perception. And then he becomes her sole fixation. She can only look to the left, to where she believes his presence is, So wild. And then she's talking to this doctor who's trying to cure her of her blindness, and she doesn't want to be cured, and he's just marveling at how he was able to blow the hearts out of her eyes so cleanly.
Yeah, it's a weird stance for a doctor to take. And this whole thing, like this fixation on the gaze to the left and stuff, and this unbearable look me in the eyes, as someone with schizoaffective and psychosis and stuff, it really is hard to not fixate on what you're seeing. And it's really often, I've been in a situation where someone kept being like, don't look at it, look at me, look at me, look at me. And I found it insufferable. And I really identified with this character as a result of that. I was like, oh man, I totally get what she's talking about. Just this transfixion and the desire to get lost in this illusion.
Right. That's profound. It also makes me think of, from like a magical perspective, the gaze, right, of the muse, right? The powers in that perception. It's in the gaze to be able to transform someone. And right, this shooter is very much reminding me of like Cupid Eros, right? Shooting out the hearts of her eyes, right? With precise, perfect shot. This is very much that Eros type action, right? Eros is that archer with the perfect shot. And she's blinded by love. That's another thing that they say. It's very interesting.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. Thank you.
So let's continue here.
Now we have a drawing. The solar plexus, it has a translation of the text within the drawings, which I think is cool. The solar plexus are made of veins of pearl and silver. This is the cabinet of the solar plexus. And that's where she's staying right now. And as we can see, there's two beds, which are the eyes, and the window, which is where the third eye is. And it's this window that she's looking out and gazing to the left above the tree line into the white sky.
Wow. The solar plexuses are made of veins of pearl and silver. So interesting.
Hmm. And then on the next slide, we have the original drawing with the original German text. So I love that they were able to actually reproduce the drawings and then translate everything within the drawings. I think that's
Yeah,
quite
that's
interesting. Quite the feat.
awesome.
So next, I didn't even hear the bang. How about you? Me, I didn't hear a thing. I simply became very tired yesterday, at a time of day when I never feel tired. But I hate operations. Leave everything as it is. I'll manage. I'll get used to my new line of vision. I wouldn't advise an operation, said Dr. Mortimer, even though we've had 2 hearts on ice since yesterday. It might result in impaired vision, and no one would recognize you anymore from the expression in your eyes. You don't have impaired vision, do you? I shook my head and stared at the brightness in the distance to the left, which my eyes drank in like sustenance. Are you strong enough to hear the whole truth? Dr. Mortimer asked me, trying vainly to look me in the eyes. Actually, I'd like most of all to go to sleep, I replied. I'm trying I'm trying to decide which room to sleep in tonight. I was thinking what an effort it would be to make my way to any one of them. Every step, just the thought of it, was a slog. I was thinking how sad it would be that not a single person would step in and organize everything the way I pictured it to myself. The truth is, Dr. Mortimer said in an emotional tone that revolted me, that he, I mean the sharpshooter, is now in possession of the hearts from your 2 eyes, and it is quite likely that these hearts are still alive and intact. That's the whole bitter truth. His pastoral
Definitely,
tone was so odious I could scarcely listen.
definitely Cupid arrows, right? Wow.
100%. Did he want to make life a misery for me? It should have been his duty as a doctor to give me courage, but it was always this way with him. As long as I could remember, he would sit at his post and wait for the enemy to attack. He told me he was there for my personal protection, but I never had the impression that he could actually protect me from the enemy. I was too worried by him and his constant waiting for an attack to find him reassuring. If only I had never entered the house of illnesses. How long had it been now? Who was keeping me locked away here? No doubt Dr. Mortimer was merely some sort of employee, a wage earner. I'm going to bed now, I said, but when I stood up, I staggered with weakness. So not having an eye heart was like an illness after all. I advise you to sleep tonight in the cabinet of the solar plexuses, said Dr. Mortimer. The solar plexus is the body's golden mean, where everything is at rest, except in phases of love or hate, and you are too weak for those at the moment.
Whoa, okay, that's interesting. It's the golden mean, right? Again, we're getting into this kind of Luciferian solar type magic. And we're getting into this kind of well, what we have this Cupid imagery. We have her constantly looking over to the left and noticing that bright light, And
The
now we're
gaze and the
seeing
muse.
that, right, the solar plexus is where you're producing the golden mean, the golden path, the middle, the perfect, right, and shot out his eyes perfectly in the middle. Really interesting imagery that's all related to this kind of Apollonian Lucifer type stuff, right? Because Lucifer is that absolute middle, the middle way, and the left hand path, and the bright light who shows the way. So
It's all
interesting.
tied together.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
beautiful. It's beautiful. You won't have to worry about being disturbed in the cabinet. Shall I come with you? I shook my head, held out my arm, and allowed him to inject me with his sleeping draught. At the door, Dr. Mortimer fixed me with a solemn look, straightened himself up, and for a moment he resembled a person who had been very dear to me and who I was trying to forget. From now on, he has your eyes in his power. The direction in which you are now compelled to keep looking is the very place where he is to be found.
To the left, to the left.
I felt my weakness worsen and held on to Dr. Mortimer for support. It's extremely dangerous, he said, this time not without pathos, but in a cheery tone, as if he actually wanted to say that spring was on its way. Everything has become exceedingly dangerous since I started living in this building, I smiled. Good night, Dr. Mortimer. Keep a good lookout for the enemy. It really did seem as if spring was approaching. Exceedingly dangerous? No, not at all. As I walked along the colonnade, down the small staircase, and past the chambers of the hands, I heard the first nightingale outside. The injection had made me into a veil that wafted along softly and gently. I thought of the distant window in the cabinet of the solar plexuses, of the bed of golden blonde hair, and already I felt that this direction was searching for me, through the open window, slightly to the left, in the pale whitish distance above the little tree on the horizon. On the left, over there, there in front of me, that's where my eyes, which I still hadn't inspected in the mirror, would be able to go to sleep. There was what I called their cradle. Only there did they feel happy. Far from me. So very far from me.
Okay, so even that so very far from me, right? Apollo, Lucifer is the far worker, right? The one who works, who shoots from afar, you know? And this again, this idea that he's coming from the left with the golden, in a bed of golden blonde hair. Like, whoa, so much wild. Beautiful. Love it.
I hadn't thought of a lot of this imagery when I was reading it, but I knew you'd be able to extrapolate it. So here we have a drawing, my new line of vision. Yes, that's how it was, and I could do nothing about it. And you can see her line is drawn to the two hearts, the hearts of her eyes in the distance.
Which are stars above a tree off in the horizon, you know? Wow. Beautiful.
Next, we have a drawing introducing the next chapter. This is him, my mortal enemy. And here we have this chimeric almost being again.
And it's like this bird devil thing.
Two-headed bird with there's a face in the middle of its torso.
Yeah. And it's ripping out a heart.
Yep. And we have the German drawing, the original drawing here after as well. And I believe it's carrying away the hearts of her eyes.
That's so wild. Her enemy is what stole her gaze, her perception, the hearts of her eyes. And it's this Luciferian vulture. Wild.
So the next chapter, my mortal enemy. During my convalescence, which was only making slow progress, these thoughts and images preoccupied me and never ceased to stream into me or rise up inside me, to the extent that I was loath to pick up or look at anything. A number of strange thoughts crossed my mind, which I shall attempt to set down here. Dr. Mortimer entered, the person for whom I felt the greatest indifference in the house of illnesses. He was, it had taken me a long time to realize, my personal death.
Oh, naturally,
wow. Yeah. Naturally, the figure of death as we know it from an allegorical representation is not everyone's death. Each person, as I now realized, has their own particular death with whom at times they have lived in very close proximity. My death, who was playing the doctor, disappointed me with his insincerity and theatricality. I do not know anyone else's death, but I am convinced that some people have a much more dignified and fascinating figure of death than I do. Dr. Mortimer was not even capable of shocking me, let alone evoking a horror. He left me cold. That was all.
Oh, wow. So Dr. Mortimer becomes this death figure for her, that Reaper, right? That Saturn Kronos or that Thanatos, whatever. Beautiful. Wow.
It kind of reminds me of when I was in the psych ward. You know, the psychiatrist would come talk to you for about 10 minutes, very banal conversation, and then leave. You know, and it was like this indifferent, almost like they don't have time to give everyone the due that they need, right, for each visit. So it's like this impartial coldness. And I
Yeah.
feel that. I feel that here.
And it just feels like they're waiting for you to die, right? And they're just watching,
Exactly.
monitoring your end. Eesh, scary, terrifying.
He left me cold, that was all, That's like,
Oh, he
that is
didn't.
death.
Yeah.
So the only thing I appreciated about him were the excellent sleeping drafts which he gave me, and the fact that he was very liberal with these injections,
Death has good drugs. What can we say?
right? A most, a most excellent medication. I thank him for my most lucid hours. Interesting that the sleeping draft brings the lucid hours, and
Right.
sleep is when she's most lucid. The
That's so
dream
interesting. Where she feels her most self. Yeah.
within the dream. Apparently, Dr. Mortimer did all he could to save me, as he called it, but I now know that actually it was someone else who dragged me from my lethargy. The white haired man who, time and time again, fed me the fairy tale soups of my childhood, one spoonful after another. So now we have Ani Michaud coming into the picture. The white haired man of whom I knew nothing except that he had a way with herbs and was kindly disposed to me, had a face that was as familiar to me as my own. Despite this, I was too shy to tell him what it was that weighed so heavily on my heart. We scarcely spoke to one another. He seemed to be as absorbed in himself as I was, and thus just as distracted. I only saw him perhaps 3 times during my eye complaint. As Dr. Mortimer termed it, each time he brought a blue bowl of soup which he had made for me, and it was these 3 meals that helped me to regain my strength. The magic of cooking, right?
Right. And 3 bowls of soup. The white haired man is very, very Dionysian. You know, when you're seeing this, it's kind of wild.
They were prepared with virtually supernatural knowledge. It was as if I were savoring the salt of life itself. If
Savoring the salt of life. Oh my God. So Dionysus is often associated with salt in the alchemy and the savoring, the savior. This is something we even saw HD had talked about. She equated savior and savoring of the food, right? And Dionysus is a sacrificial bowl that was consumed, right? In the sacrifice. You're supposed to savor him like the salt of life. And he's that god of generation at his most primal, right? The generation of the cycles, the dying and the rising vine. So the life itself. Anyway, just
it's
wow.
beautiful, it's
Yeah,
beautiful.
love it.
If I ever see the white-haired man again, I would like to give him a present in return. This afternoon I looked out of the windows of the chambers of the hands, where I had been sunning myself for a few hours in the mother of pearl glow of the thumbnail, and saw that the white-haired man was lying on the enemy's gun position. It is constructed in the form of a column with a platform on top, and this monument stands in the courtyard of the House of Illnesses. You reach the top by ascending a narrow staircase which winds its way up inside the column. The white-haired man was lying in the shadow of the old and very large cannon, whose fat barrel pointed down from the gun platform at the loveliest wide-open window of the cabinet of the solar plexuses. I think he was asleep. His head was resting on one of the 3 rusty cannonballs. Again, the number 3. But I don't have the impression that he actually works at the Institute. Dr. Mortimer never mentions him. I feel scared when I consider that he might leave, might depart through the entrance, which I still haven't found.
He seems to have this ability to come and go without knowledge, and he knows where the gates are, the entrances, right? Again, so Dionysian. And there's some weirdness here. Chamber of the hands, like that's some, and I'm sunning myself for this mother of pearl glow of a thumbnail.
We'll see a drawing of the Chamber of the Hands a bit later. It's really something else.
Right. And then, now we have the white haired man has a canon of his own, you know? So we having these two kind of, what's interesting too is that Dionysus and Lucifer or Apollo are twins, right? Are polar opposites, right? You have the sunlight of the day and then you have the sun in the underworld, right? Dionysus. And now you're seeing the white haired man with this Dionysian energy coming to save her. And he also has a gun. the cannon with the 3 balls, but he's not shooting her eyes out, you know,
No, he's sleeping. He's
right?
resting.
He's resting. It's interesting. He's resting with her, right? Engaging with her in the dream.
Exactly. Well said.
Let's continue.
Next slide. Yeah. I am almost certain that he will come when the enemy launches a new attack on me. Ah, those lovely soups.
The soups
And,
protect you from the attacks, eh?
yeah. And now perhaps I'll get to the main point of this chapter. It's about time, the mortal enemy. I'm quite aware that I have enemies like everyone else. Some of them, but definitely the smallest number, resemble human beings, and perhaps I've known one of these for many years. I am quite certain in my mind that these enemies live neither in my town nor in my own country. Of course, they take a shot at me from time to time when the mood takes them. But since their weapons and the injuries they inflict have always been the same, I am bold enough to hope that over the years I've become immune, just as one becomes immune to a particular germ once the body has become accustomed to it and no longer reacts. Yet one can never say that for sure, and the science of enemies is riddled with deceptions and uncertainty in just the same way. My mortal enemy, the sharpshooter, whom I have scarcely seen and rarely spoken to, is an example of just how wrong one can be about enemies. Goethe, and I have read the same in Strindberg, warns emphatically against directing overpassionate thoughts of love or hate at distant persons. All the same, black magic cannot be eradicated. For even if you follow the advice of these two great poets and curb your mental projections so as to avoid firmly binding a person or thing to yourself with your thoughts, you can never be sure that others will do the same. It is now the third time, if not the fourth, that my mortal enemy has troubled me in this appalling manner. This person who let me know that he loves me pursues me with his love in such a vengeful way that one day I shall succumb to his attacks.
Oh, wow. This really reminds me of a lot of the Greek myths too, where you see these beautiful muses or the nymphs or these incredible women who are tormented by these figures and then have to run, right? And escape that horror, that gaze and that violence. And often they transcend and become stars, you know? Like I think of the myth of Orion, you know?
Definitely. And this whole passage really reminds me of Artaud with like the enemies using black magic
True.
against him, you know? I saw this parallel immediately as I was reading it.
That's also a good point. And I also love that she mentions Goethe, right? Goethe is one of the most, clearly a dragon, definitely knows the mysteries, wrote Faust,
Yeah.
Werther, so many incredible books. And she's just like, even though these masters tell us to curb our thoughts, how do you protect yourself from these dark people who have dark designs, right? And in her mind, it's this horrible gunman, right, who's pursuing her.
Yeah, and she mentioned Strindberg too, which I think is important. August Strindberg was
Right.
very a playwright and very dreamlike works, and that just ties in the whole dream aspect of the work, I think.
True. We have this romanticism and then we have this dreamlike stuff, because Goethe is
Hmm.
like, one of the founders of romanticism.
Yeah. For almost a year, I have not stepped outside of the house of illnesses. I have fallen prey to a magician's terrible mental powers. I complain bitterly about the fact that hate and love are so close to one another. Ah, I complain about the fact that you never really know whether you are being loved or being hated. What an effort it is to keep black magic at bay and not believe in it. He has received neither a hair nor scarcely a handshake or a kiss from me. Yet still he manages to mold and squeeze me, to force his way through me, and finally to eat me up.
Wow. Right? That erotic gaze and that man as an enemy of violence and that sexual appetite as that violence is such a scary image, the way she's projecting it here. And again, it really makes me think of a lot of these mythological images that we see. This idea that being abducted, being pursued, right? And the duality of that Aphroditic magic, the power of Aphrodite. We see what happens to the divine Helen. The most beautiful woman in the world causes this incredible violence as people cannot. Everyone wants to possess her. And we see this in our own real world, right? Think about pop divas and what happened to someone like Britney Spears and the insanity around that. And this is a recurring thing that keeps happening, this obsessive desire turning into violence and hatred, right? Scary.
Very scary. You're going to love this next passage. I cannot say how I arrived at this certainty, but one thing is for sure, and he would agree if I asked him. The two animals that stood guardian over his birth are the white eagle from the clouds high above the tallest peaks, and the red lacquer scorpion from a crack in a wall in China. Each person has to get to grips with their own two animals, and in the long run, it's hard to get along as a threesome. But I think my mortal enemy is having a really bad time of it. With the red scorpion as guardian, he is in constant danger of killing himself by his own actions, and that is certainly how he will meet his end. The white eagle would like to see him removed from the face of the earth, but the red scorpion makes sure that this doesn't happen. Sometimes I feel I have overcome my mortal enemy by mental exertions. For days on end, I believe that I have not thought of him, and have often reached the point where I have forgotten what he looks like, until the moment he strikes again, and I simply lie there, astonished that I am still alive.
Wow, we're getting some deep, intense imagery here, right? The white eagle, that's Zeus. That's a Jupiterian energy. The scorpion, the red scorpion, Scorpio, you're getting this chthonic energy again, Dionysus, but in the sign of Scorpio. So we're also seeing this astrological allegory coming out at play, and from a crack in the wall in China, coming from the east, the red lacquered scorpion coming from the east. This is, there's some serious wildness, and the guardian, right? And this struggle between the earth forces, this chthonic natural earth force, and that air divine solar force represented by the eagle, right? This is a constant struggle that you see within the Greek mythos.
Definitely. And the white and the red reminds me of like blood and semen,
Right. It's also, again, red and white is, you have the Olympian versus the chthonic. The red and black is the chthonic, and the white or the light, the bright, is that Olympian, and again makes me think of like Prometheus and Zeus, right? Prometheus bound to the Caucasus Mountains, having his liver forever consumed by the vulture, and then turned into that medicine, bound for trying to help and change, and you're having these two. Remember, in the Greek myth, you have two Zeus, two deities, one who rules in the heavens and one who rules on the earth, right? And the earth is that underworld, it is that hell, and Dionysus is the ruler of the earth. He is Hades as well, so it's, and if we look at Apollo is Simpredato, or he is also, he is the power of Zeus in the world, right? He shares the throne with Zeus. He is equivalent. It's really complicated, but they talk about it in the Orphic text. It's wild stuff, and we're just seeing all of this. She clearly knows her stuff, I think.
Yeah,
tapping into that imagery,
and coding it into this dream-like fiction.
Right.
But what I don't understand at the bottom here is precisely the question which some people ask themselves when, like myself, they had a mortal enemy, a loving mortal enemy like mine. Why does his love cause him to kill his beloved? Strindberg said that it is karma that makes the poor unfortunate act as he does, whether he wants to or not. He must kill, slowly but surely, the very thing he loves most in the world. What a sad fate having a karma like that. and no one can relieve him of it. Once he has killed me at last, well, what will be the end of it all? He himself will die. Is there any sense in that? As if one were mistaken in believing that love protects life. As if it were a lie that love is a blessing.
Wow. Seeing the other side of that erotic image, that eros, the black magic, right?
And
That
we have
possession
we have
magic.
black magic in the drawing here. Black magic is being practiced, a cautionary example. And she's being used almost like a voodoo doll or something by the
Well,
mortal enemy.
it's almost like that is a doll. That is a doll that the mortal enemy created and is
Yeah.
stabbing, right? That he's causing this pain into her, shooting her with his arrows from afar, right? Wow.
It's wild stuff.
So wild. And look where he pierced the one arrow right through the doll's eye, and then the other is through her arm into her heart.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting. Next, we have this is the Chamber of the Hands. If we go to the next slide, there's a translation of all the texts. So it says, I spent a sunny morning in the thumbnail. It was a quiet but festive sojourn. And then in each knuckle of the fingers, it says door. And those are the different entrances into the Chamber of the Hands.
The 5 entrances, 5 gateways. And then each of these gateways is numbered, right?
Yeah.
Look, sorry, I didn't mean to flip, but if you look at the
That's
numbers,
okay.
it's interesting. The pinky is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And then 1 is the thumb. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very
Interesting.
interesting.
Wow. And it reminds me of henna,
What does it remind you of?
some kind of henna.
Yeah, that's sort of the vibe that I got from it as well.
Interesting.
Now we come to the Trapper. Today is perhaps the 15th or 16th day since my arrival here. Not long for an eye complaint such as I have, but already there is someone who wishes to force me out, half sick as I still am, and even though it is well known that I have no refuge outside this establishment. There is someone who wishes to end my illness by force. Dr. Mortimer would simply laugh at me were I to reveal my suspicions to him. As a conscientious doctor, he will have calculated how many weeks will be necessary for me to overcome my malady so that he can discharge me with a clear conscience. Although he is always lying in wait in his watchtower for a new onslaught by the enemy, constantly ready to defend me with his very life, he would not believe me if I told him about what I have noticed since this morning. There's someone here, the Trapper. His traps are clandestine operations, which he can only perform on me when I am alone in one of the rooms, either asleep or in this new wholesome state of distraction, with my eyes gazing through the window into the already so familiar distance to the left, when what people call mind and spirit has drifted away with my eyes into the white dazzling light of the horizon.
Oh my gosh, this is Hermes. Right? This is Hermes' energy. Hermes is the trapper. He's the one. Okay, Hermes is the Lestes, the pirate, the human trafficker. He steals the bulls from Apollo. And because he keeps stealing Apollo's bulls, in order to stop it, Apollo gives him the caduceus, the whip of persuasion, for which he can command. And the thing too with Hermes is he is this guardian of the threshold. He prevents you from crossing. He tries to distract you. He's the magician. He's that great trickster. He's the ass. He obscures your perception and doesn't allow you to see where you're going, unless you know the secret passwords, unless you have something to offer him. Part of the trick is learning to see beyond him, is to not pay attention to what his hands are doing, right?
Love it. The Trapper does nothing but set health traps on every side for me. If, for instance, I step into one of the traps that is by my bed and it snaps shut, I suddenly feel myself growing very strong. My mind is governed once more by a useful, objective spirit, and I get the desire to perform unnecessary yet beneficial movements. If I step in the trap under the window, a funny urge compels me to wander about and go down to the courtyard, as if I have the desire and strength to uproot trees. There was another trap on the table where I put everything I've busied myself with before my eye complaint. All at once, one of my hands, the more ardent of the two, tries to do everything at once. Leaf through books, make drawings, write letters, arrange things in an orderly manner.
Wow. Again about this ordering, right? She's trying to bring order and stability to the world around her, and but she keeps getting trapped in
Trapped by
the
health, which I think is
right?
really interesting and mirrors sort of these desires to be in these ecstatic, unstable states with Animi's show, you know?
What's also, it feels like she feels like this world is a trap, right? And that this
Yeah.
body and this health, if she falls for health, then she can be possessed by the far shooter, right? The one who stole her eyes, because then she'll have a physical body he can actually come for. And she keeps retreating into her dreams to hide from him, you know?
And she also, if she's healthy, she has to leave the house of illnesses, and she doesn't
Right,
want to leave. She
right.
says the world is a cold outside, the outside world is a cold place, right? Earlier on.
That's very true. Wild.
But while my body, instantly duped, of course, by this devious trap, plunges into all of these semblances of action, a deathly calm yawns at its center, in my solar plexus. I have been able to rely on its signals all my life. Yet now, when my body is already dancing and executing leaps of joy in trap keepers, my solar plexus remains unmoved. I have to believe this one place in my body which cannot deceive me. For a person must believe in at least one thing in their life if they do not wish to go mad. I realize that a really spiteful attempt is being made to fool me, to propel me into a new catastrophe. I am supposed to feel strong so that I can act yet again. Yet inaction is quite the best thing for me right now. I shall stumble over one of these enforced actions to fall flat on my face. Ha! I shan't give him the pleasure. Can't I have some time to catch my breath? I shall defend myself.
Wow, she feels like the world is conspiring to give her health and to force her into action, into movement towards this far shooter, right? To this enemy.
And it's
Wow.
important. It's important here. You know, it's important to know when to act and when to rest, right?
Yeah.
And she feels that right now she needs to rest. She needs to regain her strength before she can act.
And she does that by going to her center, to her solar plexus, right? And she believes that in the center of herself, in that depth of her body, is the one place that she can find truth, right? Where she can't, otherwise, she'll go freaking mad. If there's not one thing she can believe in, if she can't even believe in the center of herself, then she has nothing.
Exactly.
Wow.
Powerful stuff.
So powerful.
So now we have another drawing. These are the vaults of the head, also a room for recuperation, but not as soothing as the cabinet of the solar plexuses or the chamber of the hands. So we have the window again, where the third eye is. The bed of sounds is the eye on the right. The bed of images on the left. More windows. The bed of scents is the nose. The bed of whispered messages is the mouth. Another window on the chin.
Interesting. Wow. The vaults of the head.
So this is another room within the House of Illnesses.
Right. For potential recuperation and the exploration of the senses through these sleep. Wow.
Very bizarre.
So interesting.
Now we have another passage, the knife in the heart. People have always been divided into two groups, victims and murderers. I don't know whether it is possible in the course of one's life to free oneself from one group and switch over to the other. I, at least, have not yet managed to become a murderer. It's my fate to be an eternal victim. Naturally, this has meant that I've become a hypochondriac, just like every real victim and every real murderer. Knives fill me with abhorrence. How often I have cut myself, but I have yet to see a woodcutter. Perhaps watching one would lessen my loathing of knives. I prefer spoons, but it would be ridiculous to try to slice meat with a spoon. The first time I read of a knife in the heart was as a child. Magua stabbed Uncas, the last of the Mohicans, Fenimore Cooper. Secretly, I became Uncas and played out his destiny on summer afternoons in the garden. When I was when I was older, I gave the name Uncas to the man I loved. Straight away, he plunged a knife into my heart, and I sloped off deeply hurt. Since then, my heart, which I don't think much of because it generally behaves like an idiot, has often been pierced like a sieve. That doesn't seem to bother it. It just keeps wanting to serve as a target all over again. It's disgusting. I no longer pay any attention to my heart. That's why I have turned to my solar plexus. As I have said, it seems to be the noblest part of my body. My heart, on the other hand, has degraded itself. I don't want to hear anything more from it. It has a nasty feminine nature. So now I am almost relieved that my eyes have hearts as well. Even if my eye hearts have gone, they were surely more valuable than my suicidal heart.
Wow, so much going on here, so wild. The knife in the heart imagery is so intense, and she brings up the last of the Mohicans, which is an amazing book, turn of the century American literature, which is intense. So this character of Magua, he had his entire tribe and family wiped out, and then after this experience becomes a being solely fixated upon revenge and the possession of this daughter. He wants to kill this guy he calls the gray hair, who is this general who had wiped out his tribe, and gets into this whole big kind of dramatic fight here. But what he rips out people's hearts, the Magua, and eats them as sort
Oh,
of this
wow.
like ridiculous ritual. Now this is fictionalized stuff,
Yeah.
but they're trying to show you this man who's driven to the nth degrees by this need for revenge after he lost all of his loved ones and his home and his identity, and he stabs Uncas and rips out his heart, so that's the image that she's referencing,
Right. Pretty wild.
intense, right? And just this idea, right, of that trying to destroy your very soul, to be that victim, right, to be attacked by the murderer. She's really seeing herself as this one and having her heart ripped out and eaten, but even when her eye hearts, the other thing that's wild here is how she ends this, right? Even after she loses her heart or is being attacked, she also feels vulnerable to her own suicidal actions. She feels attacked from inside and out,
Yeah.
so dark.
Weirdly, bit of a premonition as well of her unfortunate fate in real life.
Right? Oof. Good point.
Too heavy.
Too heavy.
Here we have another drawing. I'll try to read it. I saw these monstrosities, a close-up from the film of the convulsive skin complex in the vault of the head, in the bed of images. I didn't spend more than 2 nights in the vaults of the head, and even then that was too much to be forgotten. I warn everyone about the vaults of the head in the House of Illnesses.
Oh, wow. The vault of the head. And look how grotesque this image is. It really makes me think of like organs and eyes and genitalia and just viscera.
There are a lot of eyes in it.
And it's and what are these numbers? 8, 5.
It's actually it looks like a bouquet in a vase or a vase.
Yeah, it is a bouquet in a vase. Oh wow, I see that now, but it's also so grotesque.
Yeah,
It's like
I didn't. I
super Baudelarian,
yeah, Les Fleurs de Mal in on full
right?
display here.
Oh my gosh, that's gross. Interesting.
I love this next passage. The people will get a bit of a kick out of it, I think. Forbidden rooms. You are not allowed to enter all of the rooms. Either they are too beautiful, so that when you have to leave them, you long for the rest of your life to return to them, or they are so revolting that when you leave, the memory of them sticks to you like mucus, and there is no getting rid of it. I was in a very beautiful room before I came to the House of Illnesses. And when I had to leave it, I wanted to cling to a chair so as not to have to go. It was absolutely the room in which I belonged. I knew that my best energies would be liberated there and only there, but nobody seemed to respect my wishes. I had to go, and I found it difficult to stop myself from screaming and crying as I left. You always have to keep dragging the memory of a nasty room around with you. As for the House of Illnesses, I have grown wary. Right from the start, I decided that I preferred the cabinet of the solar plexuses and the chamber of the hands. I assiduously avoided the hall of bellies and the bosom parlor, and because of that, I had to spend some time in the vaults of the head, which is where the fever proved to be most fruitful. I slept once in each of its four beds, the bed of aromas, the bed of sounds and whisperings, in the bed of pictures. That is the reason why I am now able to write this account of the House of the Illnesses. I often hesitate when I pass two particular doors, not because I have the impression that I belong inside, but because curiosity dictates that I should examine each of the rooms. We are speaking now of the room of hearts and the room of eyes. Obviously, my curiosity is more quickened by the room of eyes, for I've already described what state my heart is in.
Oh wow. But you've also described what state your eyes are in there,
Right?
they had their hearts blown out of them
But
completely.
that still seems to be better than the suicidal state of her heart, right?
That's true. Yeah, wow. Wow, there's some darkness here. And this is so interesting, all the different compartments, and this idea that she had found her perfect place, her absolute center, where she felt most at peace in the House of Illnesses, and they dragged her from this room and into another room.
Hmm.
That's such pain. And I feel like that's something that's very human as the cycles change, where we once felt comfortable is no longer the same. And sometimes we lose sight of that path.
I had to go, and I found it difficult to stop myself from screaming and crying as I left. Reminds me of being taken to the institution, being taken to a psych ward,
Yeah.
which hasn't happened to her yet, but will. That's how
Wow.
I felt, that's for sure.
It's like a memory that's in her soul that she has yet to experience. Wow.
Yeah, it's
That's brutal.
wild. So, next slide. Today I stopped in front of the door to the room of eyes and had almost opened it when I recalled my eye complaint and decided that it was still too early to step inside. As for my eyes, I have now examined them twice in the mirror since my accident. The first time, they really were empty. Something was missing inside. It was quite alarming. I waited a week before examining them again. I now think that Dr. Mortimer is a swindler. My mortal enemy is not really in complete control of my eye hearts. Something of these hearts seems to be slowly returning to my eyes. Mortimer seems intent on completely subjugating me to my mortal enemy through my fears, but I must guard against my fear. I must also try to rekindle my belief in the humanity of my mortal enemy. Perhaps he was simply experimenting and will gradually return my eye hearts to me once he is finished. Even eyes belong sometimes to the forbidden rooms. Every child knows that. Although one sometimes forgets when one has grown up, as is true of so many important things one still knew as a child. I often have a terrible desire for forbidden eyes. I look into them when I can no longer control myself, when I am certain that the other eyes won't notice. Yet even that always entails a great deal of danger and inclines one slightly in the direction of black magic, and having experienced its effects on my own person, I wish to spare others at all costs. I already suspect that for me, one day, the room of eyes in the House of Illnesses will become the room of Bluebeard the Knight. We shall see how that turns out. I suspect the worst.
Oh wow! I just want to point out here that she is saying that perception magic, that act of viewing and and objectifying someone with your sight, is black magic, right? That desire, that obsession is an act of violence. It is that black magic in essence, which is so wild. And then this figure of the Bluebeard Knight. This is super interesting to me, you know. Wow. Because Bluebeard, that's a Viking type name, and this idea of a defender, some kind of wild defender coming, you know. And the blue relates to, we see a lot of these figures become associated with the blue color because it's a sign of their purity and their transcendence and growth. Both Shiva, Krishna are depicted as blue. You'll even see Dionysus in the blue, and it's also a sign of the magic and the medicine that they've taken to undergo the rites.
Yeah, definitely. And Bluebeard is also a French folk tale as
Oh,
well by
okay.
I pulled up his name here, Charles Perrault, written in 1697.
Oh, I'll have to look into that. I'm not as familiar.
He's a wealthy man who marries and kills his wives.
That makes sense with what we're talking about here, right? You have this guy who kills his wives, he possesses these women and then kills them, and that's how she feels, right? That she's a possessor. Oh wow! So now you're gonna have another person who's gonna come and fight. Oh God, interesting. Let's see where this is going.
So now we have the outline of the keyhole. This is the keyhole in the door to the room of the eyes in the House of Illnesses. I've peered through it and right into the center of my mortal enemy's eyes, which floated within the frame of the wide open window. Two jewels, infinitely precious and lit by an evil fire. I almost fainted, but the eyes slowly closed and saved once again I could flee. Bottom of the window frame, the horizon landscape with a small tree. So she looks through the keyhole into the room of eyes and sees her mortal enemy.
And again, her mortal enemy are these stars above the tree line, coming and piercing in all the way through the keyhole, right? That idea, right? The keyhole imagery is intense too because it's coming in through her doorway and is perceiving her. It's that peeping Tom, right? It's that, again, it's this violent act where she feels like she cannot be alone. She can't be protected. She's constantly being pursued. Wow.
Just wild. This next passage is where it gets pretty crazy. The enemy's hiding places are set in the wall of the lobby like serviette lockers. Each has a number. When I take a stroll in the lobby, a little imp sometimes prompts me to open one of these pigeonholes. So, for example, I have opened numbers 3, 9, and 99 because those are my favorite numbers. As I suspected, all three pigeonholes were empty. From number 3 came the high-pitched, heartless laughter of a young girl. From number 9, the crabby voice of a business director, saying, "The honorable businessman cheats the honorable businessman until the honorable businessman has conducted the honorable businessman to the honorable gallows." And from 99, a number which certain circumstances have turned into my number of destiny, I heard nothing but the sound of limitless expectation. An indescribable sound, which if one wanted to compare it with something familiar, might vaguely resemble the sound that a solitary person only hears in silence, of their blood coursing through their body, similar yet oh so different to the sound one hears on placing a shell to one's ear. Does one know?
Wow.
I'll read this last part and then we can decipher this. There was no enemy hiding place with the number 100. The pigeonholes only went up to 99. And curiously, 99 was located right in the middle of them all. The other 98 pigeonholes were arranged around number 99, giving it a modest place of honor.
Wow. So 99, right? 9 is the highest number in the Pythagorean number system. That fire, that completion energy. And 9 is related to Lucifer, Apollo,
Yeah,
right? And Medea. It's that wild energy. Seeing the two nines, that's the two gates, two dualities, two completions. The final, you completed one cycle and now you're completing the second cycle, right? It's that final end.
the 9 is the last phase in the cycle before, 10 or 10 is really 1, right? And it restarts.
And she even says this here, nothing but the sound of limitless expectation, right? The 9 is that power, but it's even more profound than the 100, right? There was no
Exactly.
hiding within the number 100 because now you're back down to a new cycle again. You're starting back at 0.
Right.
Pigeonholes only went up to 99. And this is also really interesting. The pigeonholes only went up to 99. When you're talking about pigeonholes, the temples of Aphrodite, most of them, all across the Mediterranean, would have these pigeonholes. And then, because the pigeon is actually a dove, and these were sacred to Aphrodite, and she would allow them to be stored in all of her temples, you know? Just wild.
Wow. I didn't know that. That's awesome.
So that's deep love magic we're seeing here with the pigeon stuff and the pigeonholes, and that there's 99 right before you complete. Wow.
I love it. Next page.
Okay.
This number 99, which always seemed to me like a deep breath before a decisive word or resolution. There you go. Or even something or even something final that precludes anything else, and which on account of its shape I like to compare with Romeo and Juliet, or at least with two people, a man and a woman. This number was written in white while all the others were black.
That's beautiful, right? It's that penultimate moment before completion, 99, or you could even see it in the Fanis or the Adranahari Ishvara, the coming together of the masculine and female.
It's
Right?
beautiful. She has it full display here. I
Beautiful.
cocked my ear to this open, empty 99th pigeonhole for longer than was good for me, listening to this terribly lonely, utterly soundless sound that hailed from eternity, and which must have existed in the universe before the beginning of all beginnings. And as I listened to it, it also seemed to flow out of me. Cosmic arrows, right?
Cosmic arrows again. Such beautiful imagery. Wow. Amazing.
By the time I noticed that I was losing what little energy I had regained since the start of my convalescence, it was too late. As I turned to leave, I saw Dr. Mortimer's eyes observing me through his thick lenses. He had been standing behind me. He knew everything. "You're overtaxing yourself," he said reproachfully. "You should have been asleep long ago." I felt a prick in my forearm and awoke many hours later in the cabinet of the solar plexuses. My gaze drifted off to the open window. Everything in the world had turned gold and green, and the sky lost its tired white light. As I watched the flight of the swallows in the blue sky, and the way they mingled with the large shadows of the calmly gliding ravens, I had to summon all my strength to prevent myself from seeing ghosts.
Whoa.
Fata Morgana, images of eternal happiness, appeared in the sky and then changed into a wealth of dreamt up scenes. Something merciless held sway over it all and forced my eyes to keep watching. Who was it again that had thought up this new, torturous, and heartless magic for me? Who wanted to prove to me that happiness exists, that dreams will come true, hopes will be fulfilled? House of illnesses, you are not a house of recuperation. How is anyone in this house to find their way back to life if these dreams never stop inviting us to join the fun? Every morning I examine my eyes in the mirror when I get up. Every day the emptiness seems slightly to have filled. One day the hearts in my eyes will have fully returned. That will be the day I depart. And I have made up my mind to make a proper search for the exit this afternoon so that I can leave this house.
Wow. Okay, so first off, a Fata Morgana. Okay, there you have the red goddess right on display, right? That's Hecate, Lady Babylon, Medea, but in the Celtic, wild
Yeah.
energy there. Amazing. Images of eternal happiness appeared in the sky and then changed into a wealth of dreamed up scenes, right? Wow. Something merciless held sway over it all and forced my eyes to keep watching. Who was it again that had thought up this new torturous and heartless magic? Who wanted to prove to me that happiness exists, that dreams will come true, hopes will be fulfilled? It's this Luciferian magic that's trying to get her to wake up and come into generation and embrace love. And she is rejecting it with every aspect of her entire being. She sees it as this violence, this rape, this attack. It's really reminding me of Salome, right? I really am thinking of this scene where you have Salome in the play by Oscar Wilde, and she's talking to Joa Khan, who's Saint John the Baptist, and calling him the virginal moon. And she's like, "I want to kiss your lips. I want to possess you. I must have you. And if I cannot have you, I will rip you apart." And then, Joa Khan is trying to run. He's trying to prevent this engagement, right? This erotic magic, it's like you either submit to that loving generation or ripped up and destroyed by it. So
It's powerful stuff.
Oh man. And then she's wondering, is it her dreams are going to come true? Is her hopes fulfilled? Right? She's in this house of recuperation, but she feels like the recuperation is trying to trick her into being possessed, trying to trick her into that cycle of generation and life. And she's just like rejecting it,
It's pretty intense.
Wow. That will be the day I depart, is when, like, one day the hearts in my eyes will have fully returned. That will be the day I depart. And I have made up my mind to make a proper search for the exit this afternoon so I can leave this house. So she's still going to have to leave and going to have to recuperate, even as she's trying to reject and stay in that place in the middle, in this house where she can be at least somewhat unobserved, even though she's still observed through the keyhole, right? It's like,
And observed by the doctor too.
Right? And the doctor. Wow. Interesting.
Next chapter, secrets. Late yesterday afternoon, I carried out my resolution. And although it all came to naught and I had to return to the House of Illnesses, I'm not a little proud of my courage. The entrance was always there. It seems I had simply not seen it up to now. The door was open. Nobody stopped me. As I stepped outside, I discovered that I was on a street I knew. Then I turned round and the House of Illnesses became hazy and gradually disappeared. All the better, I thought. Now just carry on calmly straight down this street you know. The first people who came up to me asked me how I was. I gave a grateful, eager smile and assured them that I was a lot better. Yet although the sun was shining, the world didn't strike me as beautiful, as if everything was familiar to the point of satiety, as if there were no miracles out here. And all of it, the faces and my surroundings, seemed to have come to a standstill like a clock. Not the slightest thing had changed, which filled me with melancholy. I had gotten used to constant change in the House of Illnesses. Everything there was informed by a lively imagination. Here in the world, habit ruled with a rigid hand. As I was walking along, the white-haired man appeared and gave me his arm. He led me on without a word. The further I walked down the street, the sadder these surroundings to which I had once been accustomed now appeared to me.
Wow. I just want to say before we move on to
Yeah.
the next page here, like, okay, this is interesting.
I love that the entrance is always there. I had not seen it up till now. The door was open and nobody stopped me. Right? It's like that power is already within you. You just have to recognize it.
This is a constant we see in the mystery. This is the secret behind something like that phrase, open sesame, right?
Mhm.
When you come to that moment of blooming, it's because the time is right. There is no real secret to opening the gate. It's just aligning the forces and having the strength to open it, which all comes from within. And then that treasure, the limitless seeds, will be unleashed, right? It's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful imagery.
And yet what she sees is a cruel world. A
Yeah.
sad, cruel world that doesn't change.
And that's so wild because the world, the only truth of the world is change. And she sees it as this static, unchanging thing, whereas in the house of illnesses, this place where it's almost this paradox, because in my mind, a hospital setting is where they do everything humanly possible to resist change. And then in the natural world is in that constant state of change. But what she sees in the house of illnesses is a connection to her imagination, where her imagination can
Exactly.
run free. And again, she's not being perceived, right? Like, I feel like we know she's been abused. And like
Yeah.
she feels this fear of that perception of being seen, right? And she won't, the fact that she could be alone and protected and sustained within that house gave her this sense of strength, right? And it's also kind of wild. She goes out and she's under the sun, and but she doesn't experience the beauty, you know. She does,
Exactly.
and she uses this word satiety, which hits to me because to me that means satiety is the 10 of cups in the Thoth tarot, right? Which is
Mm,
again the completion of a cycle. It's like there's so much love and connection that it's run its course and it's no longer meaningful. It's like it's
right.
abundance to the point of waste, right? So like there's all of this. She sees the world, but it's like she's stuck in a standstill, right? Until that white-haired man takes her by the arm. It's
Yeah, the Waiter Man appears again. The idea of living permanently outside had something cheerless about it. Without even realizing, I turned and walked back slowly but resolutely the way I had come. I passed the same people. They seemed not to see me. The white haired man had disappeared from my side. I put on a pair of sunglasses in order to avoid seeing the blossoming trees with such clarity. The birds' songs tormented me. All the springtime theatricals, which the world was now conjuring up, made me terribly depressed. I was filled with fear that the house of illnesses might no longer be there. Where should I go? I shouldn't have left. I had abandoned all sense of security with this secret walk. I had always enjoyed secrets, doing something which no one else knew about, but it never did me any good. Once again, this is proof that I cannot survive in the world alone. Even at the cost of being unhappy, I need a companion to give me advice. Good advice or bad, but he just has to say, now you must do this and then you must do that. And I'll have the courage to go on. This is an important passage because when she does die by suicide, it's because Hans Belmer has become very ill and can no longer be her caretaker. And then
oh,
she and then while he's at the hospital, she comes home on a brief leave from a psychiatric hospital and jumps out the window of their apartment. The thought of of not having someone to care for her is just a horrifying, empty thought, a cold thought.
this is such a common fear. So many of us are afraid to take authority and action for ourselves and to be that that definer of our own lives. We want other people or something else to tell us what to do, and that things are going to be okay, and that there's going to be some kind of sense of security, and we all need that assurity at some point in our life. And we're really seeing that taken to its illogical extreme here with her, where she feels she can't live without someone telling her what she must do. Wow, that's painful.
Very painful. There where previously the house of illnesses had stood, the wind is whirling the sand through the grass. May everything now come to pass as intended. I let myself fall into the whirlwind and shut my eyes. I had become really ill. Here is the entrance, the white-haired man's voice said softly. I felt myself being carried for some distance. And then the door closed behind me. I was standing in the courtyard. A voice called down to me. Hello, you down there. This is private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. It was Dr. Mortimer, who was peering down from his watchtower and pointing a pistol at me. But don't you recognize me anymore? I called up to him in a weak, timid voice. Dr. Mortimer removed his glasses and stared at me with his myopic eyes. My, how you've changed, he said, drawing out his words uneasily. Excuse me, please, I mumbled in confusion and scurried off to the cabinet of the solar plexuses.
Oh,
And
wow.
here we have a drawing again. It is too difficult for me to draw these whirls, but this gives an impression, at least, of the feelings of spinning.
And it's the stars, the spinning stars. Wow, that's intense. Makes me think of a lot of that spinning magic we see with like Hecate and the goddess, the churning of the ocean of the milk. Also, we see this imagery with a lot of great painters, right? Immediately makes me think of Starry Night by Van Gogh. And we know he has suffered from some form of schizoaffective disorder or schizophrenia. And like this kind of spiral imagery is often a result of those disorders, Intense.
Very. We're almost at the end here. A note on my work on this book. Since yesterday, I have known why I am making this book, in order to remain ill for a while. I can slip in fresh pages every day, which then have to be filled, and stay ill for as long as I do that. But the trapper continues to pursue me. Now he has set duty traps and consideration traps. I keep trotting into them, and gradually this puts me in a dilemma. Being clever and wise, my better half wants me to remain ill for some time, because it knows that one can benefit from an illness like mine. My bad half wants me to return to my handful of duties. Yes, it feels that it is time for me to show a bit of consideration for the people around me, who incidentally are not that many. Whatever became of that old maid who looked after me as a young girl and who told me so much about the blind baroness she had attended for 20 years in Livonia? That old woman who would have to reappear in order for me to submit to the wishes of my better half. Her name was Anna. She called me her little pigeon in good old Russian fashion, and she could cook a pigeon as tasty as the soups made by the white-haired man. I would lie on my back, my eyes once again lost in the sky, which had once again turned white, and listen to her old tales of the angelic baroness, just as I had done 26 years ago. Perhaps I should now quickly put another couple of empty pages into this book. Neglecting my responsibilities tastes to me like sweet cream.
Wow. So I think we're really getting this full on display. So part of the whole thing why she loves this illness is because it allows her to be in this place of total dependence, where other people are taking care of her, where she doesn't have to worry, and she can retreat into this world of her dreams, And this is wild here too. We get in this crazy imagery with Anna and she's the little pigeon. And then she talks about how Anna cooks pigeons, just as powerful as the soups made by the white-haired man. She's a pigeon, potentially to get cooked by her. I'd lie on my back, my eyes once again lost in the sky, which would once again turn white, and listen to her old tales of the angelic baroness. And that idea of this queen of this baron that she serves. There's so in 6 years ago. Anyway, there's a lot of wildness going on.
There is so much to take in.
It's interesting imagery to think about, and this
Yeah.
idea that she has a better half and a bad half that are fighting within her,
And the solar plexus is the golden mean, right? Between
right?
the two.
Between her two halves, that's where they come together and she can find her true self. Wow.
A revealing conversation. Dr. Mortimer did not look by this morning on his daily round. He woke me from a deep sleep in the afternoon. You must decide, he said rather brutally. He remained standing by my bed with an expression as if he were planning to blackmail me. Either you remain here or you leave. I won't tolerate doing things by halves, and the house regulations don't allow it either. The time had come. I looked Dr. Mortimer up and down, taking my time, which must have embarrassed him. If only I had had a different personal death, and not Mortimer of all people. I'd not had one proper conversation with him during my stay in the House of Illnesses. This rather portly gentleman, with his general's bald plate and the 2 folds of fat around his short neck, now removed his glasses and screwed a monocle into his bulging left eye. Suddenly, a row of medals appeared on his chest, and the buttons on his jacket began to sparkle. He stamped his left foot on the floor, so that the spurs on his Japan's riding boots rattled, craned his neck, and emitted a high-pitched cock-a-doodle-doo. Maybe I was experiencing a hallucination, but something about it must have been true. I had the most revolting death of all, a militarist.
Oh, whoa. He turned into a freaking cock, into a rooster. That's so
A
wild.
general rooster.
A fascist rooster wearing those big high leather boots, right? Like, oh God, and a commander, right? And she's telling him, this is kind of wild because at one time, on one hand, she wants someone to come and dictate for her, and on the other hand, she's resisting this dictation.
Because,
Go ahead, sorry.
I was saying she was resisting it because she finds him abhorrent.
Yep, he is abhorrent. He's her personal death, but he's saying you must decide, right? Either you remain here or you get the hell out. What are you doing?
Yeah.
And she got up.
Yeah.
She can't handle being with him.
Yeah. I got up, walked away from him, and took a seat by the window. I would like to ask you one more question before I make up my mind. Go ahead, he snarled, striding back and forth in his creaking boots. If I stay here, I said, looking out of the window into the white distance to the left, above the last small tree, I would remain forever. In that case, I would ask that you grant me my last wish. I've heard that a dying person is granted their last wish. It would mean a lot to me. What is your answer? These stories about people being granted their last wishes are old wives' tales, Dr. Mortimer replied. Nothing but old wives' tales. A lot of patients have come to me in my years as a doctor asking to have their last wishes fulfilled. In such cases, I administer a sedative injection. Last wishes, he crowed, giving another stamp of his rattling boot, are not granted. That would be a breach of the House regulations and constitute a crime against humanity by the doctors.
Oh,
The
wow.
white, right? So intense. The white distance there at the back on the left released my gaze with reluctance. I looked Dr. Mortimer in the face. Then I request that I be discharged tomorrow morning. You will be discharged at 9 a.m. I would be grateful if you would be in my office promptly. Good night. He left the room and I returned to bed. This was to be my last night in the cabinet of the solar plexuses.
If she can't stay there and realize her dreams, right? Then she has to leave. because I was wondering,
Exactly.
like, why is she going to leave the house of illnesses? Because to stay in it is just to rot. And there's this recognition that while she can connect to her mean and she can imagine, she can never actually truly connect. She can never
Exactly.
actually realize anything in the house of illnesses.
And I love
Wow,
that line. The white distance there at the back on the left released my gaze with reluctance.
right?
Right?
And
The muse looking away, being like, "Your time has come. I wish we could keep gazing into each other, but you have to leave."
you have to leave. And then there's also this thing too, right? Anyone who asks for wishes and who wants to fulfill themselves in the house of illnesses is sedated, right?
Yeah.
To desire something is to is not allowed here, you know, and that's why eventually she has to leave. So it's kind of wild that because it's that very desire that's also her greatest enemy, you know, it's that erotic Cupid force. You know,
It's
interesting. Let's see where this goes.
the last adventure. This is the last chapter. On this evening, the last I spent in the House of Illnesses, the sky was resplendent with colors, violet, gray, and red. I had not received a sleeping injection and knew that I had plenty of time to think and to carry out my last actions. Only once it had grown completely dark did the cuckoo start to call. In my youth, I had always asked, "Cuckoo, how many years have I left to live?" On one occasion, it called 7 times, on another, 17 times, and once it was only twice. I was wary of asking it now. I would return to my oracles soon enough.
Birds are oracles, my friend.
Yep.
Love it.
But first, I had to leave this house once and for all. I also heard an eagle howl and then a tawny owl. It was the same as every evening here, except that I didn't grow tired, but ever more wakeful by the hour. Finally, I got up, dressed, and removed my things from the table. The room was filled with a silent light as the moon appeared, and I walked once around it and bade it farewell. I ran my fingers gently over the breathing veins of pearl and silver that wove their way up the walls and formed pure, solemn forms. And on touching these precious depictions of solar plexuses, I felt for the first time a trembling in the center of my body, soft and calming, then melted into an inaudible sigh. A trace of courage returned, and I opened the door and left this worthy abode forever. On my way to the room of eyes, I thought of a sentence I'd read somewhere, a fragment of which went roughly as follows: "There are actions which we have neglected and which never cease to call to us." This sentence gave me the courage to open the door to the room of eyes. It too was filled with moonlight and a pregnant silence. Lying on the table was a silver platter. Only when I leaned over did I see resting on it two little cocoons of enormous delicacy, like mist flowers in the form of hearts. They forced their way into my eyes with fine pinpricks that made me cry. The lethargy fell from my lashes, and the last veils were raised. A red lacquer scorpion fell through the air and landed on the plate with an evil clattering noise. Without stopping to think whether I was right to do so, I crushed it under a small stone Buddha statue I found beside the plate. The crunching noise of rage that ensued from its destruction was replaced by a glassy wail as I tossed it into the fire. White wings fluttered through the open window. A white eagle bowed before me, and for a moment I felt myself embraced in its pinions. Its magnificent blue eyes looked at me with pride and happiness. Then it flew back into the left distance over the last small tree. I cast the wax doll, which was transfixed by black needles and had a face that resembled my own, into the fire. So that's the doll that they were using for the black magic. I took another look around to see whether anything else remained for me to do. But no, nothing but order seemed to preside over the room. The rows of foreign eyes that lined the walls slowly closed for sleep. I took one last look at the window where I'd once seen the eyes of my mortal enemy through the keyhole outside. The left distance, there in the beyond, where this white eagle had disappeared, seemed to be filled with a smile that was blind with happiness. A smile I had once seen in a dream, on a stroll through the air on an everlastingly sunny day. I was comforted and left the house at dawn.
This is wild because she's made a decision. She's chosen a side. She decided to crush the scorpion, to reject the chthonic, and to pursue the white eagle, which is kind of wild because the eagle was kind of a dick to her earlier in the story, but they're really happy that she made this choice and decided to pursue that Olympic Apollonian form.
Very bizarre. And now, lastly, we just have a picture within the Forbidden Room. This is the German, and then next we have the English. And there's lots of phrases here. We have the red lacquer scorpion and the silver platter. If we go to the next slide. The remains of my eye hearts, my hand, the statue of the Buddha. These are the main things I saw in the room of eyes during my last night in the house of illnesses. The white eagle that flew in through the open window. 1 to 5, a few of the friendly eyes which gazed down from the walls. And lastly, a wax doll transfixed with black needles whose face resembled mine.
Wow, so wild. It's a beautiful ending, though, in a sense. She was able to overcome that fear, that monster, through this Buddha image and pursue and exit the house of images. But
she's decided that as scary as the world is outside, it's better than where she is inside, right? Where she's trapped. Right. It reminds me of there's a the famous sludge metal band, I Hate God, and they have a line, "In hospitals we rust."
Yeah. It's also this thing, right? They won't allow her, even though she is safe and cared for in the house of illnesses, she cannot dream, right? She cannot fully imagine or realize love. The Dr. Mortimer will not let that happen. He tells her, "I will sedate you," right? If you start talking about wishes, we're putting you under. There's no wish fulfillment here. And it's for that reason, that desire, that love, right? The white-haired man, which is that Apollonian force, right? That overcomes the scorpion, which is her enemy. And it's that pursuit of the white-haired man and that love that he represents that causes her to leave the room.
Exactly.
Interesting. What a wild reading, Graham. Thank you for sharing that with me. And it seems like our audience really loved it. So what is your final takeaway, and what do you take from this particular book by Unica?
This particular book, a couple things. Once again, it's about recognizing when to rest and when to take action. And also, like we said with the Trumpets of Jericho, it's about mythologizing your life. Bring the myth to life in your own way so that you can dream, so that you can fulfill your wishes. Right. You can walk through that door that finally appears.
And I feel like there's all this stuff too, right? The violence of being perceived, of being sexualized, of being objectified, of being seen and desired by that mysterious, violent other. That's such a terrifying thing that so many of us have experienced and are afraid of. That need, the desire to want to be cared for, to not have to think or worry or to make decisions for ourselves, that fear of action and the responsibility of decision. I can so relate to a lot of that stuff there. But then that reality that you can't dream within the house of illnesses, you can't wish, you can't fulfill anything. So even if you're cared for, it's a life of stagnation, which she ultimately has to reject.
If someone's dictating what you do each and every day, you can't do what you want to do.
No, it's a death, right? He's ultimately just guiding her to die, right? So if you stay in the house of illnesses, you will just eventually die. It's wasting of time, but it's also a protection from that gaze. But even that gaze, though, it wasn't a real protection, because the light of those eyes still pierces through the keyhole, right? It still observed her in her most intimate moments. And she chooses to walk arm in arm with the white-haired man and face that enemy, crush that enemy with the force of the Buddha, right? Even though she knows that that gaze is still out there. Wild stuff.
Beautiful.
Any final words, Graham, for Unica?
Any final words for Unica? Nothing that I haven't said already.
Amazing book. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. Everyone,
My
please
pleasure.
go check out Unica Zürn and dig more into her work. So now we're coming to the end of the episode, Graham. I want to talk to you, though. What do you have planned for your next episode? What are you thinking about next?
Yeah, so it's going to take me a while because it's a large, long text, but I'm slowly working on presenting Wizard of the Crow by Ngugi wa Thiong'o. It's a powerful book, originally written in Kikuyu, and he translated himself into English. Sorcery,
Circadian language, right?
yeah, sorcery and myth abound within this text. It is a truly stunning work. Is considered his magnum opus.
I'm so excited
And,
because I'm so unfamiliar with a lot of African literature, and just get that kind of magical perspective from someone, it's going to be beautiful. I'm so looking forward to it.
It'll take some time, though. It'll take some time.
We got a couple episodes to go. In the meantime, I'm going to be going back to HD. We're going to be covering one of my favorite works by her, which is called Helen in Egypt, where she does something incredible. She reimagines the myth of the divine Helen, right? The object of the one who is, who sparks the Trojan War. And in this story, what's wild is she goes back to these ancient sources and she finds this guy. I think it's what is his name? Stesichorus or Stericithus. I can't pronounce it. But anyway, she goes back to these ancient sources and she finds a variation of the story where Helen is protected by the divine gods and she's never actually possessed by Paris or any of the Trojans. Instead, the goddess Hera magically wishes her off to Egypt. And so the war isn't even fought over her. It's fought over an image of her. So in the meantime, Helen is off doing mystical stuff in Egypt and has her own beautiful story. And HD really wants to reimagine. This is a point in her life where she's really reimagining these Greek stories and re-invoking that feminine. And it's really powerful. And it's the muse on full display. And it's someone exercising this incredible classicist knowledge on full display. So really powerful text. I'm excited to share with you guys.
That's going to be great.
All right, Graham. So that's the end of our show. Is there anything, though, you want to promote before we say goodnight?
Just saying that a couple of quick things. My band, the Isosceles Infection, is working on a new album. We have 3 songs and a couple interludes finished. So that'll be coming in the next few months, as well as the EP with my industrial project, Imperial Dirge. We're working on songs for that. And my graphic novel, which I'm still trying to release in January.
Oh, wow. That's so exciting. So make sure you go check out the Isosceles Triangle. And you have your new industrial project that's underway as well. What's that called again?
Imperial Dirge. If you go to my link tree, the Isosceles Infection, both albums, as well as the Imperial Dirge demo that we released about a week ago, are all there.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So make sure you go check that out. And tomorrow I will be back with you guys with our dear friend Dion for part 3 of our deep dive into the Mother Goddesses cults materia prima, and this time we're looking at Hecate phosphorus, and we're continuing our exploration of the wheel. So that is going to be so much fun. Make sure you tune into that 5 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. All right. Any final words? Final words, Graham, before we say
Final,
goodnight.
final words.
Yes.
Just love yourself, and the love will shine through into everything you do.
Beautiful. Powerful words. Love yourself. Take control of your life. Don't be afraid to act. Create art, pursue beauty. Love it. All right, everyone. Peace and love. And we'll see you next time for more Searching for Dragons.
Master could be, and I pressed my eye eagerly to the grave, and I wondered who his master could be, and I pressed my eye eagerly to the grave, and I wondered who his master could be, and I pressed my eye eagerly to the grate. And I wondered who his master could be. And I pressed my eye eagerly to the grate. And I wondered who his master could be. And I pressed my eye eagerly to the grate. And I wondered who his master could be, and I pressed my eye eagerly to the grave.